Local reports show that another victim of the dubbed ghost killer has been found in their home, brutally murdered, with a smile carved into their mouth. The connection between these victims and these distinctions from the other assumed victims of the same killer has yet to be discovered, and the authorities are still shocked, claiming they don't understand how the assailant is committing these crimes across multiple states in such a short time, with absolutely no reliable traces left behind. "Dad? Dad?" From where he sat on the couch, a man sighed, the nightly news blaring on the television in front of him. Heaving himself to his feet, he made his way to the top of the stairs and walked down the hallway to the child's room. "What's up, buddy?" "There's a monster in my closet, Dad." "A monster in your closet? Didn't I check in there before we said goodnight?" "He wasn't there then, Dad. He snuck in through the window." Pushing the rest of the way into the room, the father walked over to the window, giving it a quick inspection. He found it closed and locked as always. "You sure you weren't just having a bad dream?" "I was having a bad dream, but then I woke up. That's when I saw the monster climbing in, and when I yelled, he hid." "Okay, buddy, I believe you. But don't you worry, your daddy knows how to handle monsters in the closet. They're hiding in there trying to scare you, right? So you have to scare them back. Surprise them when they don't expect it. If you do that, they disappear. Want me to show you?" The boy nodded, clutching the covers up to his face so only his eyes peeked over the top. His dad moved to the closet. "Be careful, Daddy." The man put a finger to his lips. "You have to be quiet, or the monsters will know you're sneaking up on them." Slowly, he extended his hand toward the knob, lightly grasping it. He paused for a moment, cocking his head as if listening for sounds within, before twisting the knob violently and wrenching the door open with a yell. The opening was dark. So dark, in fact, he thought for a moment that even if there were a monster in there, he wouldn't be able to tell. Suddenly, impossibly, the darkness moved. Out of the blackness flashed a whisper of silver, reflecting the moonlight ever so slightly. The man felt a sharp tug at his throat. He took a step back, confused, one hand reflexively reaching for his neck. Something there was hot and wet, and when he removed his hand, he could tell from the moonlight that his fingers were stained bright red. He barely had time to consider this thought before he found himself flat on his back in the middle of the floor. He had both hands against his throat now and could feel spurts of warm blood pulsing through his fingers. A shape stepped across him towards the bed, where the man could hear his poor son screaming. He reached out, clutching desperately at the figure, but his hands were too weak. The white shape effortlessly pulled away. A wordless croak of anguish escaped him as his child's terrified cries were abruptly silenced with a loud snap and the sounds of flesh ripping. For the next few seconds, he lay sobbing, his life slipping through his fingers, when he felt a presence standing over him. Opening his eyes, he saw the face of the thing from the closet, illuminated by the light from the hall. Textured and dark black hair framed an unnaturally stark white face. The mouth had two small red slits across its cheeks, carved into a permanent, ghastly smile. And the eyes that watched the man as his life flowed through his fingers were unblinking and dark. The man truly felt in that moment that he was staring into the pits of hell. He reached for the figure in one last silent entity. As the remains of his vision fled, he could barely see the shape raise a single finger to its porcelain lips. Slipping into darkness, He could just make out the words the monster whispered to him, his consciousness falling away into uncharted depths. Just go to sleep. Jeffrey Woods was a fairly normal, yet particularly antisocial and defiant teenager living with his parents. At 17 years of age, Jeff and his family moved into a new neighborhood after his father received a promotion. Jeff seemed to be the only person to realize when they arrived that the neighborhood looked somewhat sketchy and that they didn't belong there. As they were getting unpacked, one of their neighbors came by. "Hello," she said. "I'm Barbara. I live across the street from you, and I just wanted to introduce myself and to introduce my son." She turns around and calls her son over. "Billy, these are our new neighbors." Billy greeted them and ran back to play in his yard. "Well, I'm Margaret, and this is my husband Peter, and our two sons, Jeff and Lou." They each introduced themselves, and then Barbara invited them to her son's birthday. Jeff was about to object when their mother said that they would love to. When Jeff and his family were done packing, he approached his mom. "Mom, why would you invite us to some kid's party? If you haven't noticed, I'm not some dumb little kid." "Jeff," said his mother, "we just moved here. We have to show that we want to spend time with our neighbors. Now we're going to that party and you aren't going to talk back about it anymore." Not long after, Jeff feels an odd sensation, like the sound of bees buzzing in his head as violent imagery passes through his mind against his will. Disturbed, he chooses to ignore it. The next day, Jeff and Lou get ready for school. They arrived at the bus stop. Jeff leans against the nearby stop sign with his hands in his pockets, and Lou reads the book he was finishing. No words were exchanged between the two. While they waited, they noticed three boys their age approaching them. One was wearing a red t-shirt and had orange straight hair and green eyes. The one next to him had long black hair similar to Jeff, and the other one, who seemed like he didn't want to be there compared to his friends, had the musculature and height of someone a decade older than him. "What the fuck are you fairies doing near my house?" the orange-haired boy in front aggressively asked. The three approached the two brothers, and they immediately began making profane insults to Lou, especially involving the rosary around his neck, as well as the scarf he wore, before holding him at knife point and taking his wallet from his pocket. Jeff could feel the same feeling from the day before. Watching them do that, as if they could just do whatever they pleased, the thoughts of bodies being ripped apart and screaming faces followed along with those thoughts. Jeff proceeded to violently attack the three, brutalizing all of them with terrifying, unnatural strength, despite his weaker frame. Lou just sat by in complete shock. Jeff left them with broken arms, stab wounds from their own knives, and all that lay before him was a bloody sidewalk and the feeling of a new high coursing through his body and mind. Jeff and Lou fled from the scene after the bus approached. The two managed to escape to school with no suspicion. The next morning, Jeff and Lou woke up to two police officers knocking on their door. A feeling of extreme anger rushed through Jeff's mind, knowing the exact reason they were there, and bearing the confrontation they gave to him. Surprised, Jeff turned to find Lou at the top of the stairs. The siren song calling to violence dropped away to background noise as Lou slowly stepped down until he was standing next to Jeff. Lou faced forward. "It was me, officers," I beat up those kids. The officers paused, still looking at Jeff. Now, son, that's a very serious claim. Are you sure you want to make it? Yeah, it's the truth. Jeff just tried to hold me back. I got the knife right here. He carefully reached down, setting the blade close on the step at his feet. The officer pursed his lips in thought. His partner leaned in, speaking quietly. Steve, Randy and his friends didn't specify who assaulted them. If this kid says he's the one and he's got the weapon, it's going to be tough to pull them both in without more details. After a moment's consideration, the officer nodded slowly. Lou then proceeded to tell a fake but real-sounding story to the officers about how he's been having bad thoughts about hurting people recently. The officers then turned to Margaret Woods. Ma'am, just so you know, a judge around here will sometimes release juvenile delinquents to their parents. However, due to the extremely violent nature of this crime, Lou may end up having to remain at the center at least until his initial hearing. In either case, it will be a few days before anyone from the court contacts you about what items you can bring him during his stay. They'll make sure he's comfortable until then. Jeff's mother nodded. Of course, officer, I understand. Thank you, ma'am. And you, the policeman pointed at Jeff. Stay out of trouble, young man. He left. Jeff's mother shut the door behind him, and she rested her head against it. Jeff could see tears rolling down her cheeks, her body racked with silent sobs. He took a step towards her. Go to your room, Jeffrey. She turned to him, her face struggling to compose itself. I said go to your room. Jeff feels infuriated and shamed. To anyone who paid attention to him, it would look like he was feeling helpless. But in reality, Jeff felt a raging hostility towards Lou. Not just for his apprehensiveness about the prior fight, but also for him taking the blame for it instead of doing anything else. The thoughts and the feeling was back, and they were strong. The very next morning, Jeff's mother reminded him of the birthday party they had been invited to. Jeff was completely awestruck at the nerve of his mother to go to the party as if her 17-year-old son hadn't just been arrested. Jeff's father then looms over Jeff and belittles him. You know, Jeff, if you put in as much effort into your life as we did raising you and Lou, you probably wouldn't need to feel like that much of a screw-up. Now get your fucking clothes on and stop complaining now. Jeff felt a sharp tugging in his chest, and he clenches his fist before silently going upstairs to change. Jeff reluctantly went to the party, which shortly took his mind off of Lou. As Jeff watches the crowd of little kids playing unfairly with toy guns and their little narrative they made, he notices something that makes him stop and widen his eyes. Randy, Troy, and Keith peered over the fence and then casually opened the gate to enter the backyard. They all stare at him with looks of inexplicable malice, with bandages covering their injuries from the day prior. Jeff tries to reason with Randy, stating they're even because he beat them up and they got his brothers sent to the juvenile detention center. But Randy ignored him. You think we're fair now? I don't go for even. I go for winning. Randy then proceeds to brutally tackle Jeff, while Keith causes immense panic in the surrounding crowd as he pulls out a handgun and aims it at a bystander trying to break up the fight. The kids and adults all scream and duck their heads down in fear. During the fight, Randy barged into the house with Jeff and he grabbed a bottle of tequila and smashed it over his face. As Troy held him down, Jeff was drenched in alcohol. After Randy incapacitated him, he constantly yelled at him to fight back, and he taunted him loudly in front of the surrounding witnesses about how he got loose sent to the correctional facility. Jeff headbutts Randy as he taunts him, and he grabs Troy's arm holding his neck, and he breaks it with terrifying strength, despite having a much more slender build than him. Troy releases him and runs out of the house yelling in pain. Jeff stands up and gets on top of Randy, striking several heavy punches to his face. Before long, Randy's face was mashed to a pulp, and he was dead on the floor. Keith, frightened deeply by Randy's death, begins to shoot at Jeff, but he fails to hit him as he runs upstairs. After he runs out of ammunition, Jeff lures him to the bathroom, where he mortally wounds him by ripping a towel rack from the wall and swinging it into his head. As Keith lies against the bathroom wall, looking up at Jeff, who is staring down at him like a painter admiring his work, he laughs. Jeff watches in confusion as Keith pulls out a lighter and starts laughing maniacally even louder. He flicks it before throwing it directly at Jeff's face. The alcohol, drenching Jeff from earlier, sets him on fire almost instantly, making it practically impossible for him to put out the flames himself. Jeff then falls down the stairs of the house, and he passes out as the massive inferno engulfed him. He felt himself falling into dark, cold depths, despite feeling the fire of hell burning into his skin. He felt as if shards of ice were stabbing into his body, and he could barely make out the view of the surface above him. In his mind, he reached out for the dim light peeking at him through the surface, taunting him. He swam desperately, clawing like a wild beast, trying to break the surface and reach the light, but he inevitably gave up. He felt at peace with himself as he let his body sink into the black abyss, and the fire was finally put out. Jeff woke up in a hospital room with bandages covering his face and body, unable to move. He was visited by his mother, who talks to his father. She informs him that Lou is being released from jail after witnesses overheard Randy's confession that he was responsible for getting Lou sent to prison. Margaret Woods instantly agreed to the doctors when they asked her if she wanted them to perform a facial skin graft on Jeff. His face was so mutilated that there was barely any skin left to work with, so a new one seemed like the most reasonable option. She said that she didn't want a hideous burned face walking by them in public. Lou hung his head in shame as he looked at Jeff sadly, racked with guilt. Jeff, in his unconscious state, heard every single word that his mother said. Several weeks later, after all of the surgeries were done, Jeff's bandages were removed, revealing his new face. Jeff's mother screams at the sight, but Lou and his father are silent with worry. The surgery had left his face pale beyond belief. His hair was left unscathed, but Jeff felt like he was looking into something dark and unknown as he looked through the mirror into his own eyes. Eyes reflecting a face that wasn't his. Jeff began twitching and giggling while stroking his new smooth, doll-like skin. His family leaned in to the doctors nearby, asking if he was going to be alright, but they assured that it was simply a result of the painkillers and that it will pass with time. That night, Margaret awoke from her sleep, unsure of the reason why. She sat up in bed and listened. She could hear a faint noise coming from the bathroom that almost sounded like crying. Her heart sank, and she tried to rationalize what it could be. The sounds of the whimpers and pain got louder as she stood up and began opening her door. The familiarity of the sounds became clearer. She opened the bathroom door, and in the moonlight, she could see her son. Jeff was standing at the mirror, looking deeply into it and twitching. He was wearing the clothes prepared for him in the hospital, his white hoodie and a pair of black jeans. Margaret held her breath in shock, and her eyes only barely adjusted to the slight darkness, enough to see the absolute horror laid out in front of her. Jeff was holding a knife in his hands, and blood stained the bathroom mirror and sank as it dripped from the knife. Jeff's head stopped twitching, and not a single noise could be heard from him anymore. He slowly turned his head to his mother. His eyes looked dead at first, but almost as if he had just processed the person standing in front of him. His dark eyes widened like a predator's upon spotting its prey. Margaret could see Jeff's face clearly. His smooth, stark white skin clashed harshly with his black hair, and she saw a dark shape across his mouth. That's when she realized what had happened. Jeff had taken the blade and made 2 perfect small slits on the corners of his mouth and cheeks that mirrored a red smile. Blood dripped from his mouth as he took a step closer to his mortified mother. He twitched again, and he laughed as he began to speak to her. I couldn't stop smiling. It was starting to hurt, so I made it so I could keep smiling forever. Margaret felt her knees become weak. She couldn't speak, and Jeff's expression changed to worry. What's wrong, Mommy? Don't you think I look beautiful? Margaret turned and screamed as she tried to run from the nightmare in front of her. The eyes that stared at her as she walked into that bathroom were not her son's. When she looked back at them, she saw nothing but death itself. She could barely comprehend the terror she was in. Jeff overheard her panicked cries of fear, yelling to her still sleeping husband that they need to call the police. Jeff enters the room, and Margaret's nightmare becomes worse as she feels a hand grab her hair with ferocity. Jeff shouted in rage. He jammed the knife into her gut, and he covered her screaming mouth while she clawed at him in desperation, and he held her in place. Jeff's detached rage spiraled as he could feel Margaret struggling harder, and he held her arms and mouth. Jeff ripped the knife out of her stomach and repeatedly stabbed her in the chest with extreme force. After a moment, he was covered in a grotesque mixture of his and his mother's blood. Jeff could feel Margaret's life slipping away. He hung his head down, and he sobbed as he had in the bathroom. Margaret could barely think, but she could still hear the sobs slowly turn into quiet laughter as Jeff raised his head back up to look to the heavens. He began cradling his mother in his arms. She was too weakened to fight back. You don't have to be awake. You never were, so I never expected you to be. It's why you're covered in your own blood right now. Because you never knew who I really was. Jeff turns to his father, who had just woken up, to see Jeff rocking his mother back and forth. Jeff turned his head like a deer caught in headlights to the sound of his father's voice, asking him what was going on. Peter crawls back and screams in terror as Jeff charges him with the knife and slaughters him as well. Lou lies in bed, unaware of the noise because of his earphones that he had been wearing the whole time. However, he awakens. He barely manages to see Jeff's crimson smile and ghastly white face looming over him, holding their mother and father's decapitated and eyeless heads up to his own, causing a despairful fear of death to enter Lou's mind in an instant. Lou desperately reached for the rosary on his nightstand and swung his arms at Jeff. The rosary wrapped around Jeff's neck, but he erratically threw his head back and broke it, causing the beads and the cross to fly everywhere. Jeff pinned Lou's arms down with his foot in one hand, and he planted his knee against Lou's stomach. He put his free pointer finger to his lips as he held the knife and whispered ecstatically, "It's okay, Lou. Just go to sleep." He violently jammed the knife down into his brother's chest. He walked away from Lou's bedroom, leaving him to bleed to death before he vanished into the night.